20 years have passed since the three prime evils, Diablo, Mephisto and Baal, were slain. 20 years since Tyrael uses his sword Eldruin to destroy the corrupted Worldstone in the depth of Mount Aria. We are in the year 1285 in Sanctuary, and here is the story of Diablo 3, a story about angels, demons, and the rise of a Nephalem. And it all started in Kenduras, as a fallen star was about to shatter the ancient cathedral of Tristram. The only problem was that it was not empty.
And at the end of days, the first sign shall appear in the heavens. Justice shall fall upon the world of men. The armies of light and shadow will clash across the fields of eternity. Leah, are you all right, my girl?
It was nothing, Uncle. Just a bad dream. We should be getting you home.
But there's still work to be done. If these translations are correct, the powers of hell could already be on the move. The world must be told of the coming darkness. You do believe me, don't you, Leah? It has begun.
Leave it, Uncle! It's not important!
Many heroes of many origins saw the star in the dark sky that night and decided, for various reasons, to go looking for it. Amongst them was a barbarian who had just left his ravaged homeland in search of a foe worthy of his blade. The bright light led him into the town of New Tristram, built on the remain of Tristram, the old Tristram. The town had been abandoned for many years after Diablo cursed the place and killed pretty much all its citizens. But as time passed, scavengers came in, looking for lost artifacts and treasure beneath the well-known old cathedral. And eventually, the popularity of the place attracted merchants and traders, and a new town was built. Now it is home to craftsmen and farmers, and, for the last 6 days, undead. Those creatures started to rise after the incident at the cathedral, and forced Leah to flee the place, abandoning Cain behind. The town was in a bad situation. Captain Rumford and his men were barely able to maintain the undead outside, and even the mayor, Hollis, was trying to sneakily escape the town. So the presence of an honorable hero was more than welcomed, and to prove our worth, we first cleansed the lands from those disgusting wretched mothers, once handmaidens of the deceased Queen of Tristram, and now professional pukers of undead. Our little deed was enough to convince everybody that we were a good boy, and we quickly offered to help Leah rescue her old man stuck in the cathedral. But the key had been lost by the guards who had locked the door after a fruitless attempt to stop the undead, and it had presumably been left in Adria's hut. And yes, we are speaking of the Adria we met in Diablo 1. Remember the witch that was annoyingly far from town? Well, that's Adria. Adria was Leah's mother, and her father was said to be a great warrior, but they both died when she was young. Or so this is what Leah has been told, and Descartes Cain raised her, becoming Leah's adopted uncle. Adria was said to be a witch, and what we found in her hut kind of confirmed it. The key was there, and we also found Adria's journal, which, you can imagine, grabbed the attention of Leah. So it is alone that we continued in the direction of the place where Diablo first corrupted mankind, the place where Cain was hoping to find clues to defeat the last lords of hell. It is deep within the cathedral that we finally found Cain, and he was surprisingly chased by an old foe, the Skeleton King. This bony man was once the great Leoric, king of Kenduras. He was a loved and trusted king until Diablo decided that he was going to be his future human vessel. Acting as an intermediate, a corrupted Zakrum priest named Lazarus was charged by Mephisto to resurrect his little brother held captive in Tristram. Lazarus worked his way into the king's court and became Leoric's well-trusted archbishop. Under his influence, Leoric chose Tristram as his future home, and Lazarus ended up freeing Diablo from the containment of his soulstone. But Diablo was left weakened by his long sleep, and he needed a human body to recover its power. For many years, Leoric fought Diablo's corruption, but the king managed to resist him, though his long fight left his soul weak and the man mad and dangerous. Diablo then turned himself toward his plan B and possessed the king's youngest son, Albrecht, destroying what was left of Leoric humanity. After those events, the king did horrible things, like executing tons of citizens and even his own wife Azilla for conspiracy against the throne. His reign was finally silenced by the blade of the captain of his own army, the loyal Lagdanan. Diablo then turned Leoric into a skeleton king, and it is Leoric's own son, Aiden, who finally killed his father. Well, the returned and monstrous version of his father? But Aiden probably forgot to burn his father's body, and he was brought back again, awakened by the surge of power emanating from the fallen star. With the help of the local blacksmith Hadrig, we succeeded in opening the royal crypt, and once again killed Leoric. And it is with his own crown on our head that the mystery behind the fallen star was about to unfold, only to reveal a man. A man who had lost his memory, a man who must have suffered from a hell of a concussion.
I am not your enemy. I think, yes, I believe I have come with a warning. The darkness is coming. I don't remember.
Beside an upcoming dark event, the stranger remembered nothing but having a sword that shattered into 3 pieces as he felt, and Cain believed that restoring the blade could restore the man's memory, and so started the search. The first pieces was in the Field of Misery, a land invaded by the Khazra clan, and it happened that someone else was seeking the sword, the witch Magda, leader of the Coven. From what Cain told us, the Coven was known to be a group dedicated to the lesser evil Belial, Lord of Lies, and it would be a remnant of the Triune, a religion that was worshipped hundreds of years ago. And even if the Triune was shown as a peaceful religion from the outside, it was none of it, as it was secretly led by Lucian, the son of Mephisto. So generally speaking, the Coven is a very bad group of cultists that serves the Lord of Hell. But whoever she really was, that Magda was easily cast aside and the sword blade was ours. And thanks to her, who sort of gave a clue on its location, we figured out that the second piece was in the Drowned Temple, an ancient Nephalem sanctuary guarded by Alaric. A place only Nephilims were allowed to enter, and through his enigmatic speech, Alaric made it clear that we were one of them, that we were a Nephalem. To simply explain what a Nephalem is, we need to go back a couple of centuries ago, when the angel Inarius and the demoness Lilith, daughter of Mephisto, allied to create the world of Sanctuary, a place to escape the eternal conflict between heaven and hell. Many angels and demons, tired of this endless war, followed them, and some, including Inarius and Lilith, fell in love, and their children were called Nephalem, beings of light and darkness with power that could surpass their parents. So we can say that all humans in Sanctuary are descendant of those Nephalem. Keep in mind though that through a series of unfortunate events, most Nephalem slowly lost their power and became mere mortals. But for our hero, this ancient power was awakening. So Alaric had sensed our power and granted us access to the most sacred place of the temple, where we found the second piece of the sword as well as Magda, again, a step ahead of us. The witch spoke of a great power inside Leah and said that her mother would soon share the same fate as her, implying that Adria was still alive. She didn't put up much more resistance than when we first met, and the second piece was soon in town. As for the third piece, it had been found days ago by a fisherman in the town of Wartam, a town that was already consumed by flames. But we were too late this time, and Magda had tricked us, stolen the 3-metal piece and captured our friends.
It's your choice, Cain. Either use your Herodric arts to repair the sword, or your dear Leah dies a horrible death.
All this pain, this destruction. What is the sword to you?
To me, Nothing. To my master, Belial, everything. Your rage is overwhelming, girl. You win this round, but if the sword cannot be mine, I'll claim the one it's bound to. In the end, the blade shall be mine.
Uncle, you can't die.
In his last breath, Cain rebuilt the sword. A sword that had come straight from the high heavens. A sword that belonged to an angel. And after all these years, after staying a while and listened to so many stories, Descartes Cain was slain by a flying bug Pokemon. I mean a terrific creature. And only one word remained: vengeance. Fortunately, when Leah's power erupted, she got a glance into Magda's mind for a brief moment and saw her flee to the islands. So we jumped down the road and learned on our way that our fellow stranger had probably been dragged all the way north into Leoric's Manor, a creepy place that was once a beautiful king's house. And to find Magda, we delve into the disturbing halls of agony, all the way through the Cursed Hold, where we helped Queen Azilla release her people from their eternal torment. And it is only deep within this prison that we found the Chamber of Suffering, where that cowardice Magda had summoned the Butcher to fight for her. A body composed of various parts of demon, combining their strength and brought to life by wicked magic. Those were the Butchers, straight from hell. But sadly, this one was not as terrible as the 1996 edition.
Fresh meat.
And behind this door, in the cells of the condemned, was the stranger, and the torture had left him close to death.
I am dying.
Angel, take up your sword.
My sword.
I remember now. I was an archangel of the high heavens. I was the embodiment of justice. I am Tyrael.
Early on, we had asked Cain about Tyrael, about why the Archangel of Justice was doing nothing to help us. And Cain explained that long ago, the High Heaven and the Burning Hells made a pact to not interfere with the mortal world. And even now that the demons had clearly broke the pact, Tyrael was bound to sit and watch, because the last time that the angels tried to stop the vile corruption of demons, their battles practically destroyed Sanctuary. So if Tyrael was to interfere, the Angerous Council, composed of the most renowned Archangel of Heaven, would be alerted of the presence of demons here and humanity would be in danger. But it really was Tyrael in front of us, and he had come with a warning. Belial and Azmodan, the last lords of hell, were in Sanctuary, ready to unleash their darkness, and Belial was already acting in Chaldeum. The next part of the plan was quite easy. Magda and the Coven would lead us straight to the Lord of Lies.
It was all just stories. My uncle saw what he wanted to see.
Deckard sacrificed much to protect this world. But his work is not over.
What would you know about sacrifice?
Tyrael, the ancient law of the High Heaven strictly forbids us from interfering with the mortal world. Yet you have done so, brazenly.
All I am guilty of, Imperius, is bringing justice, while you hide, cowering behind your throne.
Silence! You will now answer for your transgressions.
You cannot judge me. I am justice itself. We were meant for more than this. To protect the innocent. But if our precious laws bind you all to inaction, then I will no longer stand as your brother.
You
thus I fell willingly. Because humanity is the only hope for this world.
I never believed all your crazy tales. Your work. You never finished. I will finish it, Uncle. I will carry on for you.
All of this led us into the great city of Chaldeum, Jewel of the East, now under the spell of Belial. And our little camp led straight into Chaldeum Bazaar, where we met Ashira, which you might recognize as she was the leader of the Iron Wolves in Diablo 2. They were mercenaries until they helped the Zakharum priests find the successor to the first emperor of Chaldeum, Akan. After that, they became the new emperor's personal guard until recently, when refugees began arriving in Chaldeum, refugees from the city of Alcarnus. The Iron Wolves were then sent out in the desert to fight the Coven, and a new Imperial Guard was created during their absence to protect the citizen from new refugees, Halhud. Before they returned, the new Imperial Guard had completely taken over the city, allowing nobody to enter or leave. Nobles and poor were confined in the bazaar, creating a bit of a tension.
You wait and see. That peasant family is going to slit your throat and rub your corpse.
Tyrell suspected that the Iron Wolves were sent out in the desert to die, and that Belial was manipulating the new emperor, the young Hakan too. So he and Leah would be trying to enter the city through the sewers and gather some information, while we would head towards Alcarnus in search of Magda, forced to pass through the Qasim outpost as other roads had been blocked by the witch. But that was just another trap, a bait to push us outside Chaldeum, and it turned out that the Imperial Guards that were there, and probably every single one in Chaldeum, were actually serpent demons covered by an illusion spell. Still, we managed to save the place, and Captain David, an Iron Wolf soldier, told us that Magda was already in Alcarnus, and it didn't take long for us to reach her.
While you hunted me, Belial's Imperial Guard captured your little witch Leah. Soon, her power shall be his!
With no more illusion to hide, Magda was slain, and Cain avenged. After her death, we learned from her journal that she had not always been alone to lead the Coven. Another witch had helped her poison the previous leader, but that witch left some years later, leaving Magda alone to serve Lord Belial. Our only chance to save Leah now was to meet the Emperor himself, and believe it or not, entering the City of Wonder and Mystery was as easy as asking for it. The Emperor accused us for the massacre in Alcarnus, and had even found our spy, Leah, in his sewers. No wonder why he was so bitter to us.
I detest violence. Gods, I leave this matter in your hands.
Once again, our strength was underestimated, and we escaped with Leah, who insisted on passing through the sewers, where she had learned that her mother was held captive.
Tell us about the Black Soul Stone! We know of the 3 that the Horadrim used to trap the Primevals. What is the purpose of this one?
Your master Belial has good reason to fear it.
Leave her alone!
The reunion of the mother and her child was almost heartbreaking, and Adria recognized her daughter at first sight. This character story is filled with mystery. Originating from Kingsport, Adria moved to Tristram when she heard of the darkness falling on the old town, and was avoided by most of the townfolks back then, because of her being a witch. The only man that did not fear her was Cain, and they spent countless nights speaking of old Horadric texts and arcane stuff in the Tavern of the Rising Sun. She eventually gave birth to Leah, but left Tristram soon after, pursuing her quest to fight the Lords of Hell, and left Cain in charge of the girl. Since that moment, Adria had kept a distant eye over Leah, fearing that going to her would only put her daughter in danger. Now she was back, and extremely motivated to help Leah control her power, from which Adria knew nothing of its origin. The old witch brought a new piece to the puzzle that day, the Black Soulstone, and pretended that it could be the key to defeating the Lords of Hell forever. That soulstone was different from the ones that were used to contain the three prime evils, as it was said to be able to trap multiple souls at once. It was a creation of Zoltan Kulle, one of the original Horadrim, who was captivated by the power of the soulstone given by Tyrael. He had studied them days and nights to end up crafting one himself, one black soulstone to rule them all. The other Horadrims were not pleased with Kulle's intent though. He was a genius, but he had become obsessed with immortality and power. He wanted to use the Black Soulstone for himself, to fill his mortal heart with the power of angels and demons, and unlock the ancient power of the first Nephelems. Because of that, the Horadrims decided to kill Kulle before he could activate his Soulstone. But it turned out to be harder than they thought, and the Horadrims had no other choice but to decapitate Kulle and hid his body in the Shadow Realm. The Order of the Horadrim never really recovered from that loss and slowly dissipate. If we were to use the Black Soulstone, Zoltan Kulle will need to be resurrected to finish his work and activate the dormant power of the crystal. He was a dangerous man to resurrect, but there was no other choice, and so we head in the direction of Dalgar Oasis, the place where his head had been sealed. On our way we met the young Emperor, who apologized for his behavior earlier, saying he was forced to act this way by Belial, who was watching his every move. Now the Emperor had found a way to bypass Belial's watch and was willing to help us find its location. That odd meeting over, we found our way to Dalgar Oasis and the Forgotten Ruins, where the head of Kulle was magically preserved. Under Adria's teaching, Leah had learned a spell which allowed us to speak to Kulle's spirit, but the dead man was not going to help us for free. He wanted to be made whole once again, and in exchange he would activate the Soulstone. So through a series of quests, we retrieved Kulle's blood and body, essential component to bring him back to life, and just before we started the process inside Kulle's impressive archive, Hakan made a third appearance. He had found the identity under which Belial was hiding, but again he stayed extremely vague on the subject. I mean, it's pretty obvious who it is, right? But more important things were about to happen, and important warnings from the former Horadrims were about to be ignored as Leah, using her new skill, brought the renegade back to life. Time for Kulle to complete his part of the deal, but something went wrong.
What is this? How has this happened?
The souls of the dead lords of hell have been absorbed into the stone. Abandon your quest, Nephalem. Your allies seek only to control you. With the power I offer, you and I could rule over all creation.
You are mad, Kulle. Give me the stone, or I will destroy you.
I don't know what we were expecting, but in a matter of minutes, Kulle was back to his dead state. How unfortunate. And all of this was because of that tricky Adria. She had learned of the Black Soulstone by Cain 20 years ago and abandoned her own daughter to find and prepare the essence of the 5 dead lords of hell so that they would be drawn to the Soulstone once it was finished. The next phase of her plan was to lock the 2 remaining souls and shatter the stone to finally free Sanctuary. Now by the time we returned to Caldeum, Belial had gone berserk and started to unleash his terror on the city, so we barely took the time to evacuate the bazaar and rushed to the Imperial Palace.
Show me the Soulstone.
You'll see it, Belial. Soon, your fetid soul will be trapped within it.
Clever, but know this, Nephalem. Azmodan knows of the stone and the power it contains. Even if you defeat me, he will exterminate you and every last one of your misbegotten kind.
Belial's mask finally fell, showing his ugly two-faced head, and ultimately transforming into this giant ugly two-faced head monster. And the 6th Lord of Hell was slain, his soul trapped like the others. Caldeum was free, but somewhere in Sanctuary, Azmodan, the Lord of Sin, master tactician and commander of the Army of Hell, was preparing his attack.
None of this makes any sense to me. What am I missing, Uncle? What am I supposed to see?
Ravaging this world and all hope of resistance. My minions will find the stone, wherever you choose to hide it. Then, at long last, Osmodan shall reign as the prime evil. Leah, are you alright? Speak to me, child.
Arian. The demon's invasion will come from Arian.
Bastion Keep, an impressive stronghold initially built by King Corsic, son of Rakis and second king of Westmarch, to deal with the barbarian threat in the north. It was now the last wall between hell and humanity, and Tyrell was willing to give everything to prevent its fall. As for Leah, she was forced to maintain a constant spell of protection over the Black Soulstone, as this artifact was nowhere near as perfect as the original 3 and the 6 lords inside were fighting to escape. Our first move in this Nordic country was to reinforce the battlements and raise the siege catapults, bringing a bit of hope to the few soldiers remaining on the battlefield. And while we were focused on these tasks, Asmodan's demons breached through the low level of the keep. We were a tiny bit overwhelmed, and our letter to the King of Westmarch did not bear fruits.
My lord says he will send no living men to battle imaginary demon lords.
Even our old friend Hollis, former mayor of Tristram, was there to once again complain about his situation. I guess he is not a lucky guy. We were forced to follow Asmodan's lead and managed to find a breach in the keep's depth, but only after Gom made displace his new lair, taking care of his infinite appetite for human flesh.
I will saber, tearing the flesh from your bones.
Our blade cut through this pestilent lord of gluttony like a knife in butter, but this defeat did not alter Osmodan's motivation. The assault was ongoing, and Leah's wrestling against the Soulstone was becoming harder. For a small moment, she even lost control over the stone, and the dark power killed all the guards in the armory. A small glance at what could happen if the stone was to completely break apart. The young girl was getting tired, having only a small rest each night while Adria was taking over the burden for a few hours. It was time to face Asmodan on the battlefield and destroy his war machines past the bridge of Corsic. Those ballista and trebuchet were built to kill things bigger than humans. Eager to use his sword again, Tyrell joined us for a moment and we fought our way through the final bridge to reach the Ariat crater, destroying a legendary siege breaker at its very end. That foe down, Adria came to us with urgent news. Leah had a vision of demonic towers and enormous hearts beating, the Sin Hearts. They were deep within Asmodan's realm and were empowering his legions. To reach them, we would have to delve into the realm of sin and face the Maiden of Lust, called by Asmodan. The road was long and the number of stairs uncountable. Running in circles around gigantic tormented creature chained to the structure of the tower was enough to give our hero a headache. And in the heart of the Tower of the Damned, we finally met Celia, known to be Asmodan's wife, if that is even a thing in hell. His concubine Spider-Woman was following us like a Gollum following a Frodo, and unfortunately was not strong enough to face a Nephalem. Sorry, Asmodan. Destroying the Art was supposed to weaken Asmodan's army, and we will never know if it actually did something, as nobody mentioned anything about it after it was destroyed. It did open the way to reach the Lord of Sin though, and it is on the bottom of those last stairs that he was waiting for us. And much like the others, he fell under the wrath of the Nephalem.
We've done it! Quickly now, Leah! Trap Asmodan's essence within the Soul Stone!
It's done!
I never dared dream. All evil lies trapped within that stone. Once it is destroyed, the eternal conflict will finally end.
Destroying the stone is no simple matter. There are rituals to consider. We must return to the keep and make our final preparations.
The news of Asmodan's defeat had spread fast, and the whole stronghold was celebrating. Even the former mayor of Tristram was saved. Citizens were right to do so. Evil would soon be completely banished from existence, and everybody could go home, forever in peace. But on the roof of Bastion's keep, an unpredictable event was about to change the tide of the battle.
Adria, when did you decide to betray us?
20 years ago, a great and terrible power drew me to Tristram. But Aiden, Leoric's eldest son, defeated that power and sought to contain it within his own flesh.
The Dark Wanderer.
It was Diablo I saw within him, and I pledged myself to his service. Now, at last, his grand design comes to fruition. Dear Leah, Deckard always suspected your true father was Diablo himself. And now, my daughter, you shall serve as his vessel.
I live. But I am more than I once was. The 7 evils are now one within me. I am the prime evil. Well done, faithful Adria. Go now, until I call upon you again. Now, at last, to my true goal, the one that has always eluded me. The utter destruction of the high heavens.
Well, I might have omitted a few details about Adria. 20 years ago, she was not in Tristram to help the citizens in their fight, but to actually serve whatever evil was growing there. It was also her, the second witch, who took control of the coven with Magda. She used and betrayed a lot of people to achieve her master's dark plan, and Leah is probably the one who will have lost the most. In her journal, Adria said that Hayden, the guy who killed Diablo and took the Soulstone to become Diablo 2's Wanderer, well, this guy came to her one night. His heart was troubled, and she could sense Diablo's corruption in him. So she comforted him, if you see what I mean, and soon gave birth to Leah, daughter of Hayden, daughter of Diablo. Was there any hope to save Leah now? I doubt it.
Even in the heart of heaven, angels can still feel fear.
my old enemy. You cannot hide from me, no matter what form you choose to wear. Let your true self be revealed. Diablo.
The mythical Diamond Gates, entry point of heaven, was now in ruins. Imperius, the Archangel of Valor and greatest warrior amongst the angels, was furious, blaming Tyrael and the Nephalem for all this trouble, and in a sense, he was right to think so, as long ago the Anger's Council voted to decide the fate of men, and Tyrael, who had the last and decisive vote, chose to save mankind. As Zoltun Kull once told us, Tyrael is the aspect of justice, and there is no justice in murder. Now it is because of the humans that the prime evil had rebirth, so Tyrael could have technically prevented all this. But it was no time to despair, except maybe for Holus, who finally died defending Bastion Keep. But for our Nephalem, the race to catch Diablo had started and many demons were standing between us, starting with the Tor version of the Lord of Terror, Iskatu, a great practice for the battle ahead. Ethereal was the second archangel we met, or the third if we count Tyrael. The Archangel of Fate was the only being able to decipher the Scroll of Fate. He was knowledge itself, but his celestial scroll had no mention of the Nephalem. Our fate was ours to write. And before he can help us, Auriel, the Archangel of Hope, would have to be freed from his jailer, who was no other than Rakanot, the Lord of Despair, hiding in the Library of Fate. Despite being one of the most badass looking monsters in hell, Rakanot was known to be a professional evil warden. It is him who kept an eye on and tortured Isual in the Plane of Despair, and once again, he had been called on the job, but his story was about to end, literally bringing hope back to heaven. Auriel, contrary to Imperius, was positive about our presence in hell, about our Nephalem nature, and Ethereal even mentioned that our power equals the one of Uldisian, the most powerful Nephalem that ever lived in Sanctuary. It is said that during the Sin War, Uldisian used his power to drive both heaven and hell back to their respective domains in one single blast. He then realized that his power has grown too big and feared that he could eventually lose himself to the evil part of his being. Before such thing would happen, Uldisian, in a final sacrifice, called forth all of his Nephalem energies and erased himself from creation. It is because of his very act of kindness and nobility that Auriel and Ethereal voted, alongside Tyrael, to spare humanity from annihilation, and we are pleased that they did so, as where would we be slaying demons otherwise? With Auriel's blessing, we continued our purification of heaven, now able to dispel Diablo's corruption. The Guardian of Hope now cleared, we were ready to climb the Silver Spire, primary stronghold of the high heavens. Diablo was seeking the very top of this great tower called the Crystal Arch, and if he was to corrupt it, all heaven would be doomed. Our ascension was slowed by the aspect of terror, pain and sin, and even Isual, once Tyrell's lieutenant, crossed our path. But none of those stopped us from reaching the pinnacle of heaven, and we were glad to meet Imperius once again. He was willing to stop us for good this time, and as much as I would have loved to fight this pretentious angel, he and his crew suddenly felt helpless. Diablo had begun extinguishing the Crystal Arch, dimming the light of all angels.
It is left to us mortals, Tyrael. It is good you no longer have your wings.
Diablo's vile corruption bars our path. Stand back. Eldruin's light shall clear the way.
The door to the Crystal Arch was open, an ultimate chance for Wallace, the barbarian, to show his quality.
The 7 evils are one within me. I am Legion.
In this state, Diablo was stronger than ever, acting as the embodiment of evil itself. Tyrell had told us of an old legend concerning the creation of heaven and hell. The legend states that at the beginning of time, there were only 2 beings in this world, the great evil dragon Tatamet and the good warrior Anu. In what must be an epic fight, they both killed themselves and Tatamet's body was split into 7 parts, creating the burning hells and the 7 Lord. As for Anu, the Crystal Arch is said to be the only remains of his godly corpse, giving birth to angels, pure manifestation of its intrinsic harmony, Archangel being the purest of them all. But today a new legend was to be written, one that says that a Nephalem killed evil itself. But this is by no means the end of our journey, as evil seems to stick to sanctuary, as we will see in the next chapter called Reaper of Soul, in which we will see through the story of Lilith and Inarius, as well as the return of the Archangel of Wisdom, Malthael.
In the end, it was a mortal heart that saved 2 worlds from ruin and cast down the prime evil forever. A new day breaks for both angels and men. For mankind's greatest champion, the Nephalem, rose to confront the darkness that we, in our pride, would not face. My brethren, I will take my place among you once again, but this time as a mortal. Since justice has been met this day, I will now stand as wisdom. On behalf of those who risked all to save us. Forevermore, we shall stand together, angels and men, in the light of this glorious new dawn.